Good morning, coronavirus sexes. This is the ticker guy. I just want to bring up a few things. Probably go longer than I intend, but I'm going to try not to have that happen. Today is the actual birth of America. It's not July 4th. It's today. It's the 19th. Why? Because today is the day that the colonists said no to the British at Lexington and Concord and meant it. It is also the day that a gentleman by the name of Samuel Whittemore took matters into his own hands when he just saw a column of British regulars going back to Boston after their failed attempt to raid the powder and ball at Concord and Lexington. He grabbed his musket, hid behind a stone wall, fired, killed one British. Then he drew his dueling pistols and shot two more, killed one, mortally wounded the other, who expired later. Of course, being that we didn't have modern sporting rifles at the time, he'd used all three of his available balls, and before he could reload, the British were on him. They shot him in the face, stabbed him several times with bayonets, and left him in a pool of blood for dead. He didn't die. In fact, he survived and wound up being dying of old age. I think it was 98. Another 18 years that he survived after the start of the Revolutionary War. Now that is somebody who said no and meant it. Today we have little tyrants that are doing things that are clearly illegal. As an example, as of today, one of those illegal orders was lifted in New York and New Jersey, and that is marinas, you couldn't use your recreational boat. Well, I know a little bit about that because I used to own a documented vessel. If you have a documented vessel, it is United States territory. The reason you document your vessel is for that exact reason. If you travel internationally, it's the reason you go to the trouble to do it. Does anybody know what preventing the commerce or personal use of something, that United States territory, do you know what that would be called? That'd be called a blockade. The physical prevention, not an economic sanction, not an embargo, which is a legal thing to do. I refuse to transact with you. No. We're not refusing to transact. We are by physical force preventing that. That is a blockade. Do you know who has the only authority to issue a blockade? That would be the federal government. And by the way, a federal blockade, or a blockade by any country, is an act of war. A real one, not a theoretical one. It's internationally recognized, has been forever. Blockades are an act of war. So we have governors who have chosen to do something that, under long-standing international law, that in fact stands longer than the United States has stood. It's an act of war, which they do not have the right to do. But oh no, there's a virus. There's a virus. We must cower under our desk. Then you have Cuomo and Newsom bleeding that their state budgets are being stretched and they can't afford and they don't have the ability to deal with getting the testing infrastructure together that they need. And oh my God, it's the federal government's job. Well, who destroyed your economy? Who destroyed your tax revenue? Trump didn't do that. You did it. Oh, Mr. Cuomo, maybe you should have thought about that. How about Mr. Newsom? Maybe you should have thought about that. How about Ms. Whittless in Michigan? Maybe she should have thought about it too. Maybe Mr. DeSantis should have thought about it before he destroyed all the businesses down here in the Florida Panhandle. Yeah, maybe all these governors that think they're so fabulous, now they want to bleat and scream and bitch and complain. Oh, well, maybe they should have thought about these things before they locked down their economies, before they threw their people out of work, before they created mass unemployment, and, oh, by the way, food lines in some places. Really, food lines. No kidding. because some of those people didn't qualify for your so-called stimulus or whatever payments you want, which, by the way, is just making money out of thin air. What's going to happen with that? Well, you know what's going to happen? It's called inflation. And you may not see it for a little while, because the last time we pulled this kind of nonsense with these nanny societies and handouts, we didn't see it for a while. But we did see it. I remember it from the late 70s. I remember it really well. I remember watching middle-class families, including my own, figuring out how much we could afford to spend on groceries. Groceries, folks. Because you know what? It really was a problem. And this wasn't, we're not talking about working poor people here. We're talking about a family that had a breadwinner who was a CPA. A real no BS degreed professional going off to work every day. And yet, figuring out exactly how much you had to budget for groceries was something that today, if you happen to be a degreed professional, very few Americans have to deal with. But we did deal with that. We got through it. But was it fun? No, not really. Now, if you think that kind of thing isn't going to come again, you better think again, because that's exactly what's coming. Oh, it'll be long after Trump's out of office. Long after Newsom and Cuomo have gotten whatever it is that they claim they have a right to get. But you know, all those state governors and all those county people, and the fat SOB sheriff over in Walton County who got up in front of the council, and instead of arguing that the Constitution prohibits you from taking someone's land without compensating them, even temporarily, because there's this thing called the Fifth Amendment that says you can't do that. Oh, no. He instead said that you couldn't recreate on your own beach, your own private property, even though we know that UV and sunlight is a great disinfectant, especially when it comes to viruses. UV very rapidly destroys viruses. That it's extremely hard to transmit a virus from one person to another outside. Not impossible, but a lot harder than it is indoors when there's no air circulation. Yeah, but you know, it's daddy government's job. Really, Mr. Cuomo, really, Mr. Newsom. You want the authority to do things that under federal, long-standing federalism, long-standing principles of nations, you couldn't do in the first place, like closing down marinas, like preventing somebody from setting foot on their own property that happens to be United States soil, committing a literal blockade. So you arrogated to yourself that power, which you didn't have. The people didn't play Concord and Lexington with you, which they had every right to at that particular moment in time. They didn't do it. They're still not doing it. It's because we don't have what made this country anymore. It's gone. You know, you don't need a musket. You just need to be willing to say no and mean it. But you know what? How the governments have done this, the states, all these wonderful governors, they're protecting people so much. Now they're bleeding that their tax base has been ruined. Gee, who lit the $100 bill on fire? Cuomo, Newsom, DeSantis, all the rest of these guys. They all sat out there and they got a lighter and a stack of $100 bills, and they burned them all up on purpose. Oh, but it's for public health. Really, it is. You know, it was funny watching the briefing the other day. Fauci and Birx were talking. They were talking up a good game too about how, look, we have this thing called ILI, which it gives us surveillance capabilities down at the county level. We can see where the flu-like illnesses are coming from. Oh, but you didn't see them the last time, did you? Because you weren't paying attention. Why weren't you paying attention? Isn't that your job at NIH and CDC? You have one job, but you didn't do it. No, instead you have Kizzy. Good Lord. Yeah, Kizzy, your vaccine researcher. That's not her actual name. It's close enough, though, because her name is obviously from Kizzy. That would be from Roots. Remember that? Yeah. Who's running around on Twitter claiming that this is, there's a lot of racism going on with this virus. Right, viruses are racist. Oh, Lord. And by the way, the reason that it's getting more black people than white people isn't because black people have chosen to stuff a bunch of bad things down their pie hole, and therefore they have a higher prevalence of diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. Excuse me? Lifestyle choices aren't, you don't choose what goes in your mouth. Every one of us, every day. Of course we do. But if you have to take responsibility for that, then there'd be a problem. So we can't possibly let that go on now, can we? Apparently not. You know, as I watch all of this, I'm astounded by what I see. And then the other astounding thing is, if you look at those ILI graphs, you'll notice that there was a spike this year in November-ish, which I think that there was some coronavirus in there, okay? I really do. And even before then, because it came kind of funny. It was early. It was odd. Of course, they tried to write it off as an influenza B thing, and then that spike went away, and then there was another one, which they say is influenza A, and then the third one, which is coronavirus. You'll notice that the coronavirus one isn't, 10 times bigger than the others, right? Isn't that kind of odd? Because that one's already started back down again, right? But if this was such a murderously nasty thing, if it was the worst thing in the world that has ever happened to America, then that spike would be, 5 times the size of the other two. But it's not. And here's the other thing. We didn't close the economy down in November, did we? And yet we had a spike of influenza caused by a virus, and then it went away on its own. And then a month or so later, we had another spike caused by a different influenza virus, and it went away on its own. And then we had the coronavirus spike, and it only went away because we destroyed the American economy. Really? Well, that's not what the data says. The data says it rolled over before the mitigations took effect on its own. So you have the two gods who we've allowed to be self-anointed up there on the podium, gripping the lectern. Oh, by the way, I thought that we weren't supposed to touch things that someone else touched. And telling us how they saved the world by doing something that their own data and their own chart says did nothing. Right. And we lap it up like dogs. We're not out there today on the real founding of America, the real birth of this nation, not July 4th. The real founding is April 19th. And we're not out there saying no, even though the data's in our face. What's going to happen when this thing comes back? They're going to try to close the economy again? Good luck. And yet you have CNN and even Fox, all of them, all of the media stations. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on with this thing. All it is a political football. You got Trump doing it, you got Pelosi doing it, you got everyone doing it. Well, you know what? Is that because they've actually looked at the data and they know the truth? And if so, how many people need to lose their jobs? How many people need to lose their businesses? How many people need to go through what we're being put through by politicians? Not based on public health, but by hubris. For how long is this going to continue, ladies and gentlemen? I guess it's going to continue until you stop teaching your children that if they see another human being and gets within 6 feet, he or she is the angel of death. That's not likely anytime soon, is it? Something to think about.